The UN, it's got to be one of the toughest arenas to defend Israel in, and the man currently taking on that challenge is right here in studio with me, Israeli ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon. Ambassador, thank you very much for coming on the Spin Room today. It's an honor to host you.
Thank you for having me.
So you've been touring here, Ambassador, with some other UN ambassadors. Tell us a little about what you've been doing and showing them and how they've reacted to what they've seen.
Together with nearly 40 UN ambassadors, we traveled in Israel. Before coming to Israel, we went to Poland. We visited the death camp of Majdanek, we visited the ghetto in Warsaw, and then we came to Israel. And it is a beautiful trip. We saw the history of Israel in Jerusalem. We met the President Rivlin, the Prime Minister, and yesterday was the highlight of the trip. We flew with helicopters to the north, and the IDF showed us the tunnels that penetrated Israel from Lebanon. It is crucial to understand because in the UN, we speak a lot about Hezbollah. We speak a lot about the Iranian funding Hezbollah in Lebanon, but there they actually saw Hezbollah on the other side of the border. They saw the tunnels. They saw the violation of Security Council 1701. For me, it was very important to bring those ambassadors to the border.
Were they shocked with what they saw?
They were. Really? I was shocked. I knew a lot from reading intelligence material, but once you come near the border and you look at the tunnel and you see the pictures, it's shocking. It's shocking. It shows how much money and energy the Iranians are investing in targeting Israel.
How difficult has it been for you to defend Israel at the UN?
I am very proud to defend Israel because I'm proud of our beautiful country, and I know that we are a strong democracy, but it's challenging because in private, people will acknowledge that what we are doing is the right thing. They even admire us, Ami. But when it comes to the General Assembly, the way they speak, it's not the same. But I'm optimistic. In the last few months, we have seen a change, and delegations are very crucial. It's not the first time I bring UN ambassadors to Israel. A few weeks ago, Ambassador Haley, before she left, put up a resolution to condemn Hamas in the General Assembly. We worked really hard together on this resolution, and we got the support of 87 member states who endorsed this resolution. Only 57 voted against it.
But it fell because you needed a two-thirds majority.
Then they came up with procedural issues about two-thirds majority.
Right.
When it comes to Israel...
So that's a failure.
No, it's not.
Why not?
It's a success. Because 87 member states in the General Assembly of the UN voted to condemn Hamas.
But let me ask you this, Ambassador, because, you know, Israel likes to boast about, you know, better relations with African countries, with India, with China, getting closer to Saudi Arabia, Oman, for example. But those countries, quite often, even in this vote about Hamas, voted against Israel. How do you explain that?
So we do have a gap between the strong bilateral relations and the multilateral arena. And the Prime Minister and myself, we work really hard to minimize this gap. And we tell the head of state and ambassadors, you cannot speak about the cooperation and the bridges we build and vote against us. And it's shifting. Not in one day, it's shifting. We see more and more countries voting with Israel, are not joining the anti-Israel resolutions. I'm optimistic even about the UN.
What about India? Do you see them voting more with Israel? Because they didn't.
Indeed. Indeed. So they choose to abstain many times,
yes. Right.
Not to vote against us. But we see the change also in Latin America. The new president of Brazil, Bolsonaro, he speaks very strongly supporting Israel, and we're seeing the voting changing in all the world.
I want to talk about the conflict with the Palestinians. You know, there are many countries who understand and agree with the Israeli critique that the Palestinian struggle is a violent one, that Palestinians have missed many diplomatic opportunities throughout history. But do you understand why the international community is also genuinely concerned about Palestinian rights, about statehood rights, about self-determination?
The Palestinians are conducting a diplomatic terrorism. Instead of negotiating, instead of talking with us or with the Americans or with the Europeans, they come to the UN and they try to pass resolutions against Israel. They spread lies against Israel.
But, sir, I asked about the concern that the international community has for their rights. It's genuine, isn't it?
So when you have those lies and we have those activities, the international community, they react. And they want to show support to the Palestinian cause. But I tell those ambassadors, why don't you bring the Palestinians and we can speak about those issues? They will not speak about them. And today I think more and more countries understand that we care more about the Palestinians than the leaders of the Palestinians themselves.
Well, what's your reaction to the U.S. Recent legislation that passed that ends all aid to Palestinians? Because I'm asking because a high-ranking official recently told reporter Barak Ravid of Channel 13 that, quote, the continuation of U.S. aid to the Palestinian security forces is a top priority for Israel. Is that official, that top official, is he wrong? Or do you agree with him that those funds should not be stopped?
It is a U.S. decision. We do not decide for the U.S. what to do or how to do, when to present the peace plan, when not to present it. We are close allies, and I close very closely with Ambassador Haley, and I'm looking forward to work very closely with the new ambassador, Ambassador Heather Nauert, when she will be nominated and confirmed. But I think we should let the Americans decide for themselves. For us, we think that the U.S. approach to tell the Palestinians to decide, do they want to receive funds from the Americans or they want to condemn the Americans? I think it is the right approach. At the same time, we do have security cooperation with the Palestinians.
That might be hurt.
It is important. It protects our interest and the Palestinians' interest. By the way, many times this cooperation helped the Palestinians in Ramallah because we provided them with information which was valuable for their well-being.
And that funding could hurt that cooperation. So
that's why the Palestinians have to ask themselves why they are continuing to pay salaries to Palestinians who killed innocent Israelis. They are paying $300 million a year. 7% of their budget goes to sponsor terrorism. They cannot have it all. They have to decide whether they want to get international funding or support terrorism.
The Trump peace plan reportedly will be based on a two-state solution, according to some reports at least. What will be the Israeli reaction, or your reaction at the UN, once it's revealed, if it is based on a two-state solution?
Well, I spoke about the plan with Mr. Kushner, with Ambassador Haley, Ambassador Friedman. We haven't seen the plan yet, but we do respect the efforts of the U.S. administration. They put a lot of time, a lot of energy. We will look at it. We will analyze it. We are willing to cooperate. We will be open-minded. When we look at the Palestinians, what they are doing, they just ignore it.
Right.
And they will not even consider it. So we will act differently. We don't know what will be the content, but once we will see it, we will react to it in a peaceful, civil manner, not like the Palestinians.
So you said that the Palestinians are ignoring it. They're refusing to talk to the United States or see them as
they're ignoring us. They're ignoring the Americans. But they want to decide the outcome of the negotiations without even entering the room.
But maybe the U.S., there are some critics who say the U.S. has been kind of one-handed with the Palestinians. Nothing was given to them for the U.S. embassy move to Jerusalem. All the funds, for example, have been cut. In fact, it does seem like an odd way to try and get them back to the negotiating table, doesn't it?
I mean, I'm getting paid to represent our interests, the state of Israel. But if I can give a piece of advice to the Palestinians, they should at least look at the plan. Maybe they will be surprised. Maybe they will find some aspect that they will approve. I think their approach, unfortunately, is the same approach we have seen in the last 71 years, is to be against, to reject the partition plan, to reject any peace initiative, and here we see it again.
You mentioned the replacement for Nikki Haley, Heather Nauert. Those are pretty big shoes she's going to fill. What kind of expectations do you have for
First,
her?
we have to be grateful for Ambassador Nikki Haley. She was a good friend of Israel, a great friend of me and my family, and we will miss her at the UN. But I'm sure we will continue to receive the support of the US. I'm sure Ambassador Heather Nauert will step in, will continue to stand with Israel. She has been in Israel only a few months ago. So
have you met her? Have you talked to her?
I met her in the past when she worked at Fox News, not in her position today in the State Department. But I'm sure we will see another friend entering the UN.
I want to move to a little more domestic issues, maybe a little Israeli politics. You've decided not to run in the primaries in the Likud party, which you belong to. Why?
Today, I have a very important position representing Israel at the UN. You have a lot of responsibility in this position, and I had to decide whether to come back immediately, leave everything and come back, and you have responsibility. The mission to Israel with ambassadors, Holocaust Remembrance Day, which we just concluded in the UN, other initiatives that we are involved, and I know that we will have another cycle. So I think there was a famous movie that somebody said, I'll be back. So I'll be back, and I'm intending to continue to serve the country when I come back to Israel.
When will you come back? Have you been promised to that job at the UN? Will you keep it?
It is called a permanent representative, but it's not a permanent position.
Right.
So I will conclude 4 years this coming summer.
This summer.
And I will speak about it with the Prime Minister, but I think 4 years, it's enough. You know, Ambassador Haley left after 2 years. It is very intensive, the UN. So
you'd be interested in ending this summer?
I will discuss it with the Prime Minister, but personally, I think 4 years, 4 successful years, if I may say, I think it's enough.
You're based in New York, in the States is where the UN is, of course. How do you see the current widening gap between Israel and the Israeli government and U.S. Jews?
First, I don't think there is a huge gap. I think we talk too much about the gap, about the problems. But I see what connects us, and I see a strong bond. Yes, we have arguments, we might not agree about everything, but I hear too much about the problems, the gap, the issues. I see it differently. I see that we have, a common past, a common present.
You don't see any crisis whatsoever?
And a common future.
No crisis?
I think we are exaggerating about that. And I think when I speak at the UN and I see our enemies, they attack all of us. They don't care if you are Reform, Conservative, or Orthodox, if you are left or right. They're coming against us. That's why we have to be together, stand together, and fight back.
But there are people who say that Israel has become a partisan issue in American politics, especially lately when there's no daylight, basically, between President Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, saying that the Prime Minister has really gambled on the GOP, on Republican President Donald Trump. Are you worried at all what might happen if a Democrat enters the Oval Office?
No. We are working with both parties. We have close relations with leaders from both sides of the Congress. And I think it's important to continue with that. And I call my friends in the Jewish community, leave your politics aside, stand with Israel. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it means that you have to criticize your own leader. But I expect those who support Israel to stand with Israel, no matter what their party affiliation is.
I want to ask you a little about the main rival to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and that is Benny Gantz and his party, Resilience for Israel. Why is your party painting him as a leftist when he's surrounding himself with right-wing figures like Bogi Ya'alon, former chief of staff, like Tzvi Hauser, who worked with the president in his government, like Yoaz Hendel, who also worked under the prime minister. So many right-wing fingers, yet they're painting him as a leftist. Why is that?
So as a diplomat, I will not get involved, even though it's hard to be in Israel during election time and not to get involved. But I will not get involved in the political cycle. I can just say that I work with the prime minister very closely. He's the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the last 3 years. And he's capable of leading our diplomatic efforts, and we can see the results. We have relations with more than 160 countries. We have head of states who are lining up to come and visit Jerusalem. We are working on more countries moving their embassies to Jerusalem. So I think we can give him credit for his work in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Who's the next embassy that's going to move to Israel? Which one?
So we have few, and I'm working on it, and we are working on it, and I hope soon we'll be able to come up with the good news.
Give us a hint.
So I will give you a hint. You have two areas. It's Central America and Eastern Europe. Those are the regions you can focus when you play the game.
Just to finish up in the last minute that we have, can you elaborate a little on how your relations are today with the Israeli Prime Minister? Because there were reports back when you were sent to the UN that said, because you were very critical of the Prime Minister back then, that he was trying to keep you away from him physically. How are things today?
Very good. We worked together in the last 3 years. I was a minister, I want to remind you, in this government, Minister of Science and Technology. Yes, I speak my mind and I fight when I think something is wrong. And that's what I do exactly in the UN, fighting our enemies. And I think the Prime Minister appreciates it. And only yesterday, he saw the ambassadors, he spoke with them before we took off to the north. He came to meet them in the helipad in the Knesset. And when you see the great work that I do with my small team in UN, I think we can be all proud of the mission at the UN. And we have a great working relationship as the Minister of Foreign Affairs. It's easy when the Prime Minister is also the Minister of Foreign Affairs.